July 10th, 1944, Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland. The early morning sun stretches over the flat fields of the U.S. Army's top-secret testing range. 3 captured German Panzer IVs sit like silent predators on the sand, their steel skin dulled by mud and battle scars from France. Colonel William Christ watches from behind the safety berm, hands folded behind his back. He's not just another officer, he's a man carrying ghosts. A limp from Kasserine Pass. A drawer filled with photographs of fallen men. Every one of them believed the same thing. German engineering was unbeatable. Christ glances at his watch. 6:43 hours. Fire! The command echoes across the range. A single M18 Hellcat tank destroyer barks, Conceit's 7.6mm gun spitting a flash of fire. The shell crosses 800 yards in the blink of an eye. Then impact. The front plate of the Panzer doesn't just dent, it detaches. 400 pounds of superior German steel rip loose at the weld seams and fall forward like a drawbridge. Silence. Officers stare through binoculars, unable to process what they've just seen. This was the tank that dominated Europe, the symbol of German precision, and it had just fallen apart after one hit. Christ lowers his binoculars, his voice barely above a whisper. Everything we thought we knew is wrong. In that instant, decades of myth-making collapse with the same sound as that falling armor plate, and the U.S. Army's understanding of the German war machine will never be the same again. For 3 years, the name Panzer carried a kind of dark magic. In Tunisia, in Sicily, in the hedgerows of Normandy, American tankers swapped stories that always ended the same way: don't go head-to-head with a Panzer IV. You'll lose. It was written in doctrine, printed in training manuals, repeated by commanders until it became gospel. The German tank wasn't just a machine, it was a myth, part weapon, part legend. To American crews, it felt like the Panzer was built from another world's steel. They'd watch their shells bounce harmlessly off its armor, while German rounds punched through their Shermans like tin. And every burned-out wreck reinforced the same belief. The enemy's engineering is simply better. But Colonel William Christ had lived through that myth and nearly died because of it. At Kasserine Pass in North Africa, he watched 14 of his men die fighting panzers they were told not to challenge. He crawled from his burning tank, shrapnel buried deep in his leg, his world filled with smoke and screams. He remembered the words of his battalion commander that day: "You can't outshoot them. You can't outgun them. Pray you outnumber them." When Christ limped out of the hospital months later, that line burned in his head. He began reading every technical report he could find: ballistics data, penetration tables, metallurgical samples. If the Panzers were truly perfect, the numbers would prove it. But if they weren't, then hundreds of Americans had died for a myth. By 1944, Christ had clawed his way into a new role, chief of the tank automotive branch at Aberdeen Proving Ground. And when 3 captured Panzer IVs arrived from Normandy, scarred but intact, he saw something no one else did: an opportunity. For years, the army had fought the Germans based on assumptions. Now Christ would fight the assumptions themselves, because myths, like machines, can be dismantled, and the only weapon that can destroy a myth is evidence. June 28, 1944. A flatbed truck rolls through the gates of Aberdeen, carrying something American tankers had feared for years: a captured German Panzer IV, its paint scorched, its tracks caked in French mud, the smell of oil and death still clinging to the hull. 2 more arrive over the next week, one from Tunisia, one from the hedgerows near Carentan. Each carries the same aura of invincibility. Each is about to lose it. Colonel Christ circles the first tank slowly, like a surgeon studying a patient before the first cut. He notes the weld seams, the angles of the plates, the burned interior where a German crew once fought and died. He sees the myth up close for the first time and refuses to be impressed. Captain James Riley, Aberdeen's lead metallurgist, joins him with a clipboard and a magnifying lens. They begin testing everything: hardness readings, thickness measurements, microscopic examination of the steel's grain structure. At first, the numbers look normal. Frontal armor, 265 to 280, brittle hardness stronger than American steel. Good metal, Riley mutters. But look here. He points to the weld seam joining the hull to the front plate. Under harsh fluorescent light, the illusion starts to crumble. The welds aren't continuous. They're tack. Welds short, intermittent spots every few inches, with gaps in between. Under magnification, the gaps bloom into voids, gas bubbles, imperfections. It looks less like precision engineering and more like desperation. Battle damage? Christ asks. Riley shakes his head. No, sir. These cracks are oxidized. They've been here for weeks since manufacture. One by one, the myths begin to die under the microscope. The armor isn't just hard, it's brittle. The welds aren't seamless, they're porous. The bolts inside the crew compartment? Poorly torqued and prone to shearing under shock. Aberdeen's technicians begin calling it cottage cheese steel. It's not just one tank. All three show the same signs: metal fatigue, sloppy joints, and welding shortcuts. German engineering, the pride of Europe, has fissures running right through it. Riley's report uses a word Christ hasn't seen before: embrittled. That single term changes everything. It means the Germans hardened their armor, past the point of resilience so hard it could stop a bullet, but not survive the impact. Under stress, it shattered like glass. The myth was beginning to crack, literally. Still, Christ knows words aren't enough. In the army, myths die only when evidence bleeds. So, he gives the order. Tomorrow morning, live fire. I want to see what happens when we hit this thing. That night, Christ can't sleep. He sits alone in his office, staring at the photos of his dead crew. If the Panzer's strength was an illusion, then all those men, they didn't die fighting German superiority. They died fighting an idea no one ever tested. As dawn approaches, he whispers to himself, tomorrow, the numbers will speak. July 12th, 1944, Aberdeen Proving Ground. 0630 hours. The range is quiet, too quiet. A low morning haze hangs over the field. Dew glints on the grass like glass shards. 800 yards. Downrange, the captured Panzer IV sits motionless, its long barrel pointed at nothing, its grey armour dulled with age and battle grime. Colonel William Christ watches as his crew prepares the firing platformer, M18 Hellcat tank destroyer, with a 7.6mm gun, the same weapon American tankers are carrying into battle across France right now. He takes one last look through his binoculars. The test will hit the thickest part of the Panzer's frontal hull, right where doctrine says, don't even bother. Behind him stand Captain Riley, 2 ordnance officers, and Sergeant Frank Novak, a combat tanker from the 2nd Armored Division. Novak has seen the real thing: smoke, chaos, men screaming over the radio. His hands tremble slightly. Riley checks the wind, negligible. Temperature 68 degrees, range 800 yards. Everything is perfect. Christ exhales. Fire! The Hellcat barks. The muzzle flash lights up the morning. For one silent second, nothing happens. Then impact. The 7.6mm shell hits 2 inches right of center. The sound is thunder rolling across the field. Through the binoculars, Riley and Christ watch as something unbelievable unfolds. The shell penetrates cleanly, just as expected. But instead of a simple hole, the entire front plate of 38 inches wide, 2 feet tall, 440 pounds breaks loose at the seams. It doesn't just fall, it swings forward, hanging by a single lower weld, like a door blown open by a hurricane. The sun catches its inner face, bright silver flashing across jagged metal. Novak gasps, the whole front just fell off. The observers rush forward in a jeep. By the time Christ steps out, the air smells of hot steel and burnt paint. Up close, the truth is horrifying. The weld seams haven't been torn apart by force they've released. The cracks are oxidized, proof they were already there long before the test shot. It didn't fail from power, it failed from seams. Weakness. Riley crouches beside the fallen armor, running his gloved fingers over the edges. "Sir," he says quietly, "these cracks have been here since the factory." Christ doesn't answer. He walks around the open hull, staring into the exposed crew compartment. The front plate is gone. The inside looks like a dollhouse ripped open gear. Levers, ammunition racks, everything laid bare. 23 steel fragments have ricocheted around the interior, embedding themselves in the opposite wall like bullets. Riley counts them one by one, 7 ounces, 4 inches long, razor sharp, each moving at 600 to 900 feet per second. In a real battle, 5 men would have been inside this space. Every one of them would be dead from fragments alone, even if the shell hadn't penetrated. Christ looks up. "So much for superior engineering," Riley nods. "So much for invincible armor." That afternoon, they fire again, different plate, same result. The welds peel, the steel cracks. Every shot tells the same story. German armor wasn't perfect. It was fragile. And for the first time, Christ feels the weight of revelation instead of defeat. If this was true, and the data said it was, then hundreds of American tankers had died, not because the enemy was better, but because no one had ever challenged the legend. He stares across the test field at the wrecked Panzer, smoke still rising from its gutted front. "The numbers don't lie," he says quietly. Myths do. That single sentence becomes the spark that will rewrite American tank doctrine across the entire European theater. Within hours of the first test, Aberdeen's range echoed again. Different guns, different angles. Every time the results were the same: plates peeled off, welds failed, armor cracked like pottery. By the end of July, Christ's team had logged 47 live fire trials, 127 shells, and 78 separate structural failures. The photographs filled entire tables: bent plates, shattered seams, fragments scattered like shrapnel across the concrete. Colonel Christ assembled it all into a 3-page memorandum marked urgent. It said simply, "Panzer IV armor is overhardened, embrittled, and prone to catastrophic weld failure. American 76mm and 3-inch guns can defeat it frontally at combat ranges. Doctrine advising avoidance of frontal engagement is based on incomplete data and may be costing unnecessary American lives." He sealed the report and sent it to Washington. That night, his phone rang. Brigadier General Gladian Barnes, the Army's Chief of Research and Development. "Colonel," Barnes said, "are you absolutely certain of these findings? If you're wrong, you'll get men killed. If you're right, we'll have to rewrite the entire tank manual." Christ looked at the photos spread across his desk, the fallen plate, the jagged welds, the microscopic fractures. "Sir," he answered, "I'm not wrong. The numbers don't lie." Barnes paused. "Then prove it. Comprehensive testing, every system, every weakness. I want it by month's end." For 16 straight days, Christ's team worked around the clock. Welds were x-rayed, bolts sheared and measured, alloy samples cut, polished, and studied under microscopes. Each result told the same story. The German tank that had terrified an army was built on shortcut stack welds, cheap steel, brittle armor. But proving the truth was only half the battle. The other half was belief. When the report reached the European theater, field commanders refused to accept it. "The proof is in France," one general wrote, "not in Maryland. They trusted experience over evidence, and experience bloody, chaotic, personal said the Panzer IV was invincible. Christ felt the same fury he'd carried since Kasserine. He'd built his entire career on one conviction: the data saves lives. But what good were numbers when men would rather die believing a myth than live trusting a chart? He tightened his jaw and told Riley, "Then the field will prove the lab." Because if the soldiers in Europe wouldn't believe his words, the battlefield would make them believe the results. September 1944, France. The 634th Tank Destroyer Battalion receives a new classified bulletin from Aberdeen Proving Ground. Panzer IV frontal armor prone to weld failure. Engage confidently between 6 and 1,000 yards. For years, crews had been told never to face a Panzer head-on. Now, a memo from a lab in Maryland was telling them the opposite. Lieutenant Colonel Samuel Hogan, a former chemistry teacher, reads it once, then folds it. Let's test the scientists. That afternoon, near Aachen, 2 Panzer IVs appear on a ridge. 2 M18 Hellcats fire, 4 shots, 2 kills, 0 losses. When the smoke clears, both German tanks look just like Aberdeen's test wrecks, one's front plate torn off, the other cracked clean across the hull. "The front just fell off," a gunner mutters. Within weeks, more reports arrive. 2nd Armoured Division, 702nd and 771st Battalions, 11 frontal fights, 11 destroyed panzers, Nepenthe shots per kill. Colonel Christ pins the photographs to his office wall. Each image means men who lived because the myth finally broke. Riley's metallurgy lab confirms why. German armor now lacks nickel and chrome bombing, and blockade have starved the alloy. Extra manganese made the steel harder, but also brittle. Stronger on paper, Riley says, weaker in battle. By November, numbers speak louder than rumor. Before the Aberdeen report, 347 Shermans lost to Panzer IVs. Afterward, only 89. Crew casualties dropped by 3/4. Christ writes in his log, "If truth arrives late, it still saves those left to hear it." December 1944. Colonel Christ sits at his desk when a letter arrives from France. The envelope is smudged with oil and dust. Inside, just a few lines from Sergeant Frank Novak, the tanker who'd witnessed that first test at Aberdeen. "Colonel, thought you'd want to know. Yesterday we engaged 3 Mark IVs frontally about 900 yards. All 3 down in under 2 minutes. The front plate felt clean off just like you proved it would. My crew came home alive because you refused to believe the myth." Christ folds the letter and places it beside the photograph of his old crew, 4 names circled, all lost at Kasserine. 4 men who died believing German tanks were invincible. The war rolls on. The Battle of the Bulge erupts. Old fears resurface, claims that German armor is unbeatable again. But when engineers inspect wrecked panzers in the Ardennes, they find the same telltale scars, cracked welds, shattered plates, fractured steel. Even the Germans knew. Captured documents reveal their own engineers admitted that 60 to 70% of Panzer IVs left the factory with weld defects, likely to cause plate detachment under combat stress. Both sides had the data. Only one side listened. April 1945. The war in Europe ends. American tank losses to Panzer IVs drop to nearly 0. Aberdeen's report becomes doctrine. Technical Manual 91985. A German tank vulnerabilities and engagement procedures. Every tanker in Europe carries it. Its message is simple. Your weapons are enough. The enemy is mortal. Trust the numbers. May 8th, Victory in Europe Day. Christ walks the now silent Aberdeen range, the same ground where one German tank had fallen apart and taken a myth with it. He looks out across the field and whispers, "The most dangerous enemy isn't the one with the thickest armorists, the one you're too afraid to question." The Panzer IV was never invincible. It was fear that made it legendary. And one colonel who refused to believe it turned that legend into data, and data into lives saved.